Hatch patterns have been a part of drafting since the days of paper and pencil. Well-placed hatch patterns can add visual interest to your drawings, as well as represent materials to be used for construction. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to create some hatches. On my screen, I have some abstract shapes. We're going to use this geometry to learn how the hatch command works. The hatch command is located in the Draw panel of the ribbon. The icon's right here. I'm going to click to launch the command, and this brings up the Hatch Creation tab on the ribbon. This tab is where we can find all of the settings used to create our hatch. The first thing I'd like to do is select a pattern. To do that, I'll move up to the Pattern panel. I'm going to click this icon to open up the menu, and then I'll click and hold on this slider, and I'll drag down so you can see some of the patterns available. Using this menu, we can select from any of the hatch patterns that come pre-installed with AutoCAD 2011. And the hatches we can select range from vector line work to these gradient fill patterns. I'm going to click and hold on the slider, and I'll push this back to the top, and I'm going to select the ANSI 31 pattern. Now that I've chosen my pattern, I need to tell AutoCAD the area I'd like to hatch. Essentially, I need to define my boundary. To do that, I'll place my cursor inside a closed area, and notice that AutoCAD gives me an instant preview. Let's say I'd like to hatch the area in between this circle and these squares. To do that, I'll move my cursor into the area, and then I'll click to accept it, and then I can move up here and adjust my hatch settings. Let's take a look at some of these. This setting controls my hatch pattern scale, or the size of my pattern. I'm going to click on this value and I'll change it to 10, and then I'll press Tab to accept the new setting, and notice how the pattern changes on screen. Let's look at this one. This setting adjusts the hatch angle, or the rotation of the pattern. Now I can adjust my rotation a couple ways. I can click and hold on this slider, and I can drag this left and right to adjust the rotation visually on screen. Or I can click on this value over here and enter the rotation of my choice. I'm going to type 45, and then I'll press Tab to accept that value. Take a look at this setting, Hatch Transparency. I can create hatch that I can see through. To adjust transparency, it's the same as adjusting the angle. I can click and hold on this slider to adjust my transparency percentage, or I can change the value over here. I'm going to click and I'll enter 75 to make this hatch 75% transparent, and then I'll press Tab to accept the value. Now that I'm finished adjusting my settings, I'll press the Enter key to accept my hatch. Now take a look at my pattern on screen. Notice my scale and my rotation look good, but I wanted this hatch to be 75% transparent, and it obviously doesn't look that way. This is the result of a mode setting. I'm going to come down to the status bar, and I'm going to click this toggle, the third one from the right side. This toggle controls whether transparency is displayed in our drawing. Now that I've turned this on, you can see that my hatch looks more like what you would expect if it was 75% transparent. Let's create some more hatch. This time I'd like to hatch the area inside these squares. So I'll move up and launch the hatch command. I'm going to change my pattern. I'll select angle this time. And notice that AutoCAD remembers my previous settings. I'd like to set these back the way they were. I can do that by clicking and dragging this slider down to 0, or I can change the percentage to 0, or I could click this flyout and select Use Current. That will also set it back to 0. Let's set the angle back the way it was. I'll click and drag on this slider and I'll drag it down to 0. I'm going to leave the scale as is for right now. I'm going to put my cursor inside the area and I'll preview the pattern. Now this looks a little bit big. I'm going to come back to scale and I'll click. I'll change this to 5 and press Tab. Let's take a look. This looks pretty good, so I'm going to click inside each of these shapes. I can't emphasize this enough. Make sure and explore all of these settings. There's a lot of good things here. We have a great deal of control over the appearance of our hatch patterns. To find out what each setting does, simply hover over it and AutoCAD will give you more information. As always, you can press F1 for more help. Let's take a look at this setting, Associative. Notice this guy is turned on. By default, all of the hatch patterns we create in AutoCAD are associative, meaning the hatch is linked to the boundary objects. That means if the boundary changes, the hatch updates automatically. Let's try that. I'm going to hit Enter to accept the hatch that I've been creating, and then I'm going to click to select this boundary. This brings up some blue grips. I'll click on this grip in the upper left corner, and notice as I move my cursor, I can change the location of this grip. I'm going to pull it down to right about here, and then I'll click to place it. And notice how my patterns adjust to match the new boundary. Not just the pattern inside this shape, but the one outside as well. That's because these hatch patterns are associative and they're both linked to that boundary. I'm going to press Escape to deselect this entity, and I'd like to create one more hatch. I'd like to hatch this circle. So I'll move up and launch the hatch command. And let me mention this. By default, when we hatch objects, we're using the pick points method. That means that I'm choosing my hatch boundary by clicking inside a closed area. Now, unfortunately, pick points isn't going to help me much here because I'd have to click inside each of these areas to hatch this single circle. Instead, I'm going to come back to the ribbon and I'm going to click this option, the Select Boundary Objects method. Using this method, I can select the boundary I'd like to hatch and AutoCAD will ignore everything else. Now that I'm finished, I'll press Enter to accept my hatch. Now that we have an understanding of how the hatch tools work, let's try and use them in a practical example. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. We'll pan the drawing over. On my screen, I've got an architectural example. This geometry represents the floor plan for a college dorm room. In this example, I'd like to apply some hatch to the interior of my walls to help simplify the appearance of this drawing. So I'm going to launch the hatch command. I'm going to choose the ANSI 31 pattern, and I'm going to change the scale to 15. We'll see how that looks. Press Tab to accept the value. Then I'll place my cursor in between the walls. That looks pretty good, so I'll click to accept this area. I'll move up and click to accept this area. I'll select this one and this one. And when I'm finished, I'll hit Enter to accept my hatch. Hatch patterns can be very effective in helping you visually organize your drawings. They can also transform an average drawing into a professional-looking presentation.